Program is about language, narrative, interpretation, these different things, right? One thing that I like to implement is that there's a particular way that I speak as a woman is getting in my program, right? And it's just how I speak in general, just in my everyday life. Now, some of these things I'm saying on here, I'm not going to take this time and explain all this stuff to a woman up front, right? I'm going to show it, then I'm going to tell it, right? But the thing is this, just through that process of interacting with me, I'm going to break down certain words for her, certain interpretations, certain things. One of the best ways of telling whether or not a woman is in the masculine submissive or the feminine submissive is her ability to resonate with your language, right? Your lingo, your slang, right? When a woman starts getting very emotionally attached to you and she's very attracted to and she's feeling you, that's oftentimes going to manifest itself in her using the way that you speak in some way, shape, or another. She might find herself unable to stop herself from copying certain words and phrases that you use. But another way of knowing when a woman is going from the feminine submissive into the masculine submissive is the way that she interprets things begins to change. And it starts to revert back to social programming. That's one sign, right? That's when a woman may begin to separate her sexual attraction to you from her emotional attraction that's gone into the place where it affects her logic and the way that her masculine structure, her animus, is set up. Right? Once a woman concludes in her mind that her animus is separate from the man that you are, and that those things are too far apart, then her animus then becomes a greater factor. The social programming of her animus starts to overtake the way she interprets scenarios, the way she interprets stimuli. I remember one time I was dealing with a woman and she was very feminine submissive with me. Right? From that feminine submissive place, I was able to show her the stimuli was neutral. Right? She was able to overcome a lot of the ways that she's interpreted things that she's gone through with her ex, where she felt like he was abusive and she felt like he was a very bad guy. Right? And I would take the same things that he did from a standpoint of her being in the feminine submissive and to reinterpret that stimuli. How did I do that? Like, one thing I do as a dom, and one thing to understand is that this dom game shit can be something that can kind of work like exposure therapy at times. Not exposure therapy from a standpoint of experiencing the fear, but exposure therapy from a standpoint of experiencing things that once felt painful in a way that feels pleasurable and desirable. So let's say I've dealt with women who may have been abused emotionally, verbally, sexually. And for them, the way that they interpret those situations was to take a victim mindset, not recognizing that the energy that they conveyed with the man that they were with, it encouraged this negative feedback loop that brought about the interpretation of the stimuli, but also an encouragement of the negative behaviors. So I do degradation, right? I've done degradation because I have a degradation kink. I've degraded women who were in verbally abusive relationships. And the way that I did it, the way that I went about it, caused them to interpret these things in positive manners. So like, let's say a woman may have been with a man who was verbally abusive. That's how she interpreted it. He did it from a place of hurt. He did it from a place of frustration with her lack of feminine submissiveness. If I get her to the place of feminine submissiveness and I say, hey, you my bitch, and I anchor those things in, then when I say the word bitch, it brings up arousal. It brings up a sense of ownership in a positive way, because the thing to understand is that someone who is a submissive, they want to be a part of something bigger than themselves, right? The masculine submissive wants to be in line with the social programming. The feminine submissive wants to be in line with the masculine dominant, right? So she wouldn't want anyone else to speak to her this way. She had a baby daddy, a boyfriend who she was with for like 6 years. She knew me for maybe a year. And it took much, much less than a year for it to get to this place. But it was such an interesting thing for her because the same things that he may have done, right? I do Dom sessions. Those Dom sessions were things that she loved. Because a lot of it is about creating that judgment-free zone, and then from that judgment-free zone, creating this safety to be dominated. See, femininity lubricates submissiveness to experience domination. If you dominate someone who is in the masculine submissive, it feels like abuse. The same type of domination at times, right? And also, I've been in situations with women, dom sub dynamics with women, where they may have gone through sexual abuse in the past, but were more than willing and open and ready to be in consensual non-consent and blanket consent situations with me. See, part of the language of programming, of like your programming versus her social programming, is not only how you speak. That's one aspect of it. But another aspect of it is how you interpret the stimuli of how she's treated within that dynamic. All right? So if I were to deal, so the same woman that I was speaking of, when her cup started to get low and she started to go towards the masculine submissive, there would be times where we would be having a conversation and I would bring up the same circumstances that I brought up before, and the way she would interpret the situation would start to sway back into the masculine submissive and viewing certain stimuli as negative. This let me know that there wouldn't be too much time longer that we would be able to interact with one another. Right? I didn't know how to correct that at the time, but that's how these things often work. And a lot of that program is also about the masculine foundation and structure that you set for that relationship dynamic. Right? There's another woman that I dealt with. I was very honest and I was direct about how I wanted to interact, how communication should work between us. Right? If a woman is in the feminine submissive, then she's not going to be overly focused on everything looking equal, on everything looking like it's an egalitarian type of relationship where she feels like, well, she's going to wait until you contact her so that she can contact you. That's a woman who's in her masculine energy. Even if it's masculine submissive, even though there's submissiveness involved, it's based off of this idea of things being equal. And why would somebody look at a relationship dynamic from a standpoint of things being equal? They would look at that when they are in a place. See, the thing to understand about the feminine submissive versus the masculine submissive is that when someone is in the masculine submissive, they view their submission as something that they give someone who meets their masculine standard. Right? That's cooperation. The feminine submissive is more in line with the actual submission, to where the submission that they receive is the opportunity to experience intrinsic desire, intrinsic reward, and to feel safe to be feminine with you. Right? So when a woman's in her feminine submissive, if she messages you and you don't get back to her in the time that she would typically want you to get back to her in, she will think about, was there a way that I interacted with this man that may have caused him to not to think of contacting me back with as much of a priority? And then she would correct her behaviors, right? Now, a woman can get into the masculine submissive and choose to do it anyways, but that starts to feel like self-betrayal. When a woman's in the feminine submissive, she can be in her feminine energy and not to think about the equality of how the interaction is taking place. So within this system and within this thought process, things work different. See, for the feminine submissive, dick is a gift, right? For the feminine submissive, dick is a gift. Being submissive It's something she desires to do from an intrinsic place. So she is going to look at and take a step back and think about the things that you've already told her about how you should interact, right? And then she is going to correct her behavior based off of her desire to connect with you, so that she can be in line with the masculine structure that you set, so that she can meet the standards that are necessary to be reciprocated with the level and the type of validation that she desires as a reward for good behavior. The masculine submissive desires that to be more of a one-to-one transaction of cooperation. And these are just some things to understand about cup theory. Now, some of this is going to be predicated upon how you carry yourself. A lot of it is as a masculine dominant. But another aspect of it is going to be the woman's capacity to have enough in her cup to do the things necessary to refill her cup, to self-soothe. If she doesn't have enough in her cup to do the things necessary to be reciprocated from a standpoint of being on that program in her actions, behaviors, attitudes, mindsets, and energies, then she's going to hold it against you if you are not reciprocating at the rate at which she thinks you should. Because remember, the feminine submissive works off of intrinsic desire and respect. The masculine submissive works off of the social programming, cooperation, and transaction. Right? So it's very important to understand the concept, right? And I'll give you some examples, right? Let's say someone is commenting on my YouTube channel, or they're contacting me to speak about my program. They're contacting me to speak about my sexual polarity quadrant. If someone is contacting me to speak about my sexual polarity quadrant, or my content, or my concepts, my ideas, typically they're going to shift their language to be in line with the way that I communicate and express my ideas. Without an agreement on terms, there's no true communication, right? So let's say we're talking about the concept of healthy communication, quote unquote, healthy relationships. Within this, typically two people will compromise on the way that they view things, the way that they interpret stimuli, the way that they interpret communication, to find a common ground. And typically that common ground will be based off of the social programming. It'll be based off of a system that's outside of both people, and then they'll both submit themselves to that. That's why I say that traditional dating typically works off of the concept of the masculine submissive, because both people are taking a thought process or a masculine system, this logical animist type system, and they are submitting themselves to that to make sure that their communication is on a foundation of equality. Because a woman's animus is typically going to be based off of, it's going to be influenced by whatever system she views as the most masculine, whatever is the strongest, most stable, most secure thought process, and her mind is going to be what she yields to. And this does touch on the gentleman gigolo complex. See, the gentleman is the masculine submissive. The gentleman will submit himself to the social programming so that things can be equal with the woman that he's interacting with, so that things can be egalitarian. The gigolo is going to view that system as the correct way, and because he views that as ultimately the correct way, he's going to pretend to be a part of that system, or he's going to rebel against that system rather than having his own masculine structure that he places as something that's upfront, as something that's direct, as something that is the way that he interacts and believes that the woman should interact with him. So although he may want to have a certain mindset that is adhered to, ultimately his goal is going to be overcoming and manipulating beyond the masculine social programming of the woman. So the woman who is dealing with the feminine dominant, where she's in a highly aroused, highly emotional state of mind, she may enter into the feminine submissive for a finite period of time. Then when she enters into the feminine submissive for a finite period of time, she is going to assess, when she comes out of that mindset, if she gained more than she lost. Right? So when she's in that highly aroused state of mind, that highly emotional state of mind where there's a lot of attraction, a lot of respect involved, she's going to do what's necessary to get that pleasure, to get that hit. It's like a drug. But when she comes out of that state of mind, when the high comes down, if she feels depleted and drained, then she's going to return back to her social programming. And it creates this back and forth pendulum swing. And I've seen this take place with many women, where many women who aren't able to get to a standpoint of feminine submissive and to attract a masculine dominant man, they will oftentimes go back and forth between this gentleman and this gigolo, having periods of time where they are dealing with a masculine submissive man, or even a feminine submissive man who has a low cup himself, that's survival mode submissiveness, who will do whatever she says, who will agree with whatever her mindset is. She will absorb energy during this time that makes her feel good about herself, that makes her feel quote unquote valued, right? And after she feels valued for a period of time, then her natural sexual desires and inclinations will start to arise. But as she gets to the feminine submissive, or desires to get into her feminine energy, she will recognize that this man cannot dominate her, that she does not respect this man, that she doesn't fully desire this man. So she'll be at odds with herself about the fact that this man is in line with her social programming, but her social programming doesn't include the things that she needs on a primal level to be satisfied within the relationship. Then when she gets there, she may want a finite period of time of tapping into the desire-filled space, but through having a negative mental narrative about what it means to be in this intrinsic sexual desire state of mind, she may choose a man who is only a sex object, or who is dangerous and dominant, but who doesn't have a program, so that she can tap into that desire for a period of time to release that energy. But if her cup gets back low, releasing that energy, her cup will get low again. And then from that place, she'll go back and forth between the masculine submissive and the feminine dominant. Now, if her cup is low, then the masculine dominant may be someone that feels like it takes too much out of her cup, right? Him being direct about what he requires is going to be something that once she gets into her masculine energy, it's going to feel too abrasive, too hard, too harsh. And once she experiences this, she's going to get to a state of mind where she's like, oh no, what about my standards? What about my values, my beliefs, my principles? Then she might get into the feminine dominant and rebel against that to try to get an emotional reaction to prove to herself that this individual isn't truly masculine, to see if this individual is willing to fold on their own principles, so that she could prove to herself that this isn't a true masculine structure, and then go back. And that's kind of like that pendulum swing. See, the masculine dominant doesn't only have good dick, he has guidance. It doesn't matter how good your dick is, if that good dick, if that sexual desire and gratification doesn't also yield to a certain level of emotional safety, and doesn't also yield to a certain level of that woman feeling free, but also feeling like she received something from that guidance. See, for the masculine submissive woman, submitting herself to your thought process is something that feels it takes a lot out of her. So she can't do it for long. She cannot do it for long. Right? And I think this is something to understand. So it's oftentimes this back and forth pendulum swing within the gentleman gigolo complex. And I believe men also go through that to an extent with the Madonna whore complex. The good girl, right? Then the promiscuous woman, or the highly sexual woman. And he might sway back and forth between the two, because one makes him feel as if this woman has structure, this woman values herself, because of the price she puts on her sexual access, because the price she puts on the relationship. Establishing a masculine foundation for him because he doesn't have his own masculine foundation. And then dealing with the woman who is highly emotional, who's highly sexual, but ultimately who doesn't offer him the level of security that he would like. See, a lot of these things are about how we interpret stimuli, how we interpret the dynamics that we're in. If we do not understand this, then we won't do what's necessary to be secure enough to be in an abundance mindset. See, the masculine dominant has to be secure enough to be direct about what he wants or what she wants. Has to be secure enough to not compromise. Has to be secure enough to be willing to walk away if that person isn't picking up what you're putting down, or has to be secure enough to allow the person space to make a decision for themselves rather than chasing after them. See, the feminine submissive has to have the security of being able to be somewhat malleable in their thought process in the masculine structure, right? See, the feminine submissive has to be able to reinterpret the stimuli, to be able to actually experience the things that they'll receive from being in the feminine submissive position. But if your cup gets too low, you won't be able to do it. If your cup gets too low as a masculine dominant, you won't be able to do it. See, there's a reason why it's an abundance mindset versus a scarcity mindset. And the abundance mindset, many people speak of the abundance mindset as, oh, just only do what serves you. Both people can't be masculine dominant, right? You have to understand that when people talk about relationships, everybody's going to look at it, or most people are going to look at it and try to convince you that just like who likes you. There's always going to be somebody who likes somebody more than the other. There's always going to be somebody who's more emotionally invested. There's always going to be somebody who wants the relationship more. There's always going to be somebody who wants sex more. These are just how things work. And I think that oftentimes for men, this is a good thought process if your desire is to be masculine dominant. This oftentimes doesn't fare too well for women who at their core are feminine. Not everyone, but most of them. At their core are feminine. At the core, they desire to be submissive. So when they hear this thought process of just, oh yeah, it's always better for a man to love the woman more. That's the only way a relationship will work, and a man to be told the same thing. If a man desires to be masculine and dominant, then, that's a good thing to tell him. But if that woman ultimately desires to be submissive, then that's the masculine submissive. Ultimately, that thought process is not going to work for her over the long term because she's going to feel too much like she has to logically convince herself to be with this man. She has to logically convince herself that this is a good man for her to be with, and she's not going to be happy with that over a consistent period of time. And then they'll try to tell the woman, oh no, you're just not used to being quote unquote loved properly. No, that's not what it is. There's something going on within the nature of how this interaction is working, where the polarity feels off balance. So ultimately, we have to understand that programming is about the masculine structure, right? If you're masculine submissive, then you're submitting yourself to a masculine structure outside of yourself and outside of that dynamic, hoping that both people will do it. Typically, that masculine structure is going to be something that is not going to be mutually enjoyable, even if it appears to be equal, right? It's not. So I think that the better we understand these things, the better we understand informal speech, the better we understand different aspects of these socio-sexual dynamics, then the better we can have polarity within our relationships and in life. So this is Coach Brody. I'm out.